Hello and welcome to our Mindful Connections podcast delivered by Forces Children Scotland, which is about sharing the stories of veterans who have made the successful change from military to civilian life. And I'm delighted to say we're joined by Stephen Williams today. Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Great stuff. And how does it feel to be in front of the camera?
Nervous. Very nervous.
But don't you worry, it'll be all good. You're in safe hands. So I think what we'll do today is, Stephen, we'll start by looking at your time in the armed forces. So are you happy to share a little bit about your time in the army?
Yeah, of course I am, of course. So I joined the Royal Scots at the time, back in 2003. I had no interest in joining the forces prior to that, really. I worked in a bank, I was just quite bored, and I signed up. Came home and said, Mum, I've joined the forces. And she's like, no, you've not. I was like, yes, I have. I'm going to do my training in a few months' time. So joined the forces purely because of the slogan, be the best. You know, I wanted to challenge myself and do something with my life and enjoy it.
Great stuff. And what was the sort of reaction from your immediate family when you said that? I think because obviously I remember that too from my family's perspective when like my brother's done it, I've done that. There's been a reaction. What was the reaction from your parents?
So my younger brother did the cadets, and he then became a joiner. So it was a case of we don't believe it, a bit surreal really. I was like, I've joined the forces. And I suppose a bit of background was I remember a couple of years before that seeing the planes fly into Twin Towers, and I think that might have maybe just sat a wee bit with actually there's more to life than just working in a bank or doing what you're doing. But yeah, I didn't believe it at all. But because there's a big recruitment drive back then, there wasn't a long waiting period.
I see.
Passed the initial tests and got selected, and I was way down to catch up for my training. So yeah.
Fantastic stuff. And yeah, I remember those posters and be the best. What does be the best mean to you?
For me, it's more challenge myself. It's not being better than someone else. It's how can I push myself beyond the limits. And I found in the forces a lot of time when people around me got tired, I feel that gave me more energy, but more energy to try and help us all as a team and keep going. Because you can't do things yourself as well. So even though it's be the best, it's be the best as a team.
No, great response, fantastic stuff. And so you got through basic training. Yeah. What was next?
So my first couple months in battalion was horrible. So my unit were in Iraq doing a tour, and they left to base at the rear party. The rear party are classes like the sick, lazy and lame, guys that don't want to do soldier in or have been injured. So it's really difficult when you have done your training to be the best and you go to battalion and it's all these guys that have either signed off or don't want to be there, or so it's quite difficult. But shortly after that, this was 2003-4 sort of time. Shortly after that, the unit came back from the force, and then you got a feel of how big it is. You know, from going with less than 50 guys in the rear party to then having 400 men come back having just done a tour of Iraq. You really got a feel for being in the forces, which I loved that, being around that, hearing the stories, and then me wanting to do it as well. You know, wanting to be part of having those stories and doing your job.
Great stuff. And you would then later return to Iraq for a second tour.
So sorry, that was the unit coming back from the tour when I was in rear party. So then when they came back, I went and did my first tour of Iraq. And the first tour of Iraq was more of a warfare tour, Basra, Baghdad, doing patrols. Quite eventful. Loved it so much. In the forces, it's usually a 2-year rotation. So 6 months training to go away. 6 months kind of away on tour, 6 months ceremonial duties, and then 6 months kind of adventure training, a 2-year cycle of that. So my second tour quickly came up again, back to Iraq for doing, it's called Operation Telic 11, they're all classes as numbers. Did the second tour of Iraq, and in that tour, even though we were initially training the Iraqi army to take over our duties and have an independent country, on that tour, I was actually blown up in the back of a Warrior 2. I think I was saying earlier that the Warrior, the tank's most protected part is the engine. It's not the guys in the back, it's the engine. But thankfully, the IED went into the vehicle's engine, that absorbed the blast. I remember that we were in the back and the top cover was open, the place covered with sand. And I was like, slow motion, that's something out of a movie. And I remember going to my mate, I was like, Hoppy, are you okay? And are you okay? Checking we're all okay. We were all fine, thankfully. We got out of the tank, done our all-round defence, got a feel for what's happening. There was no secondary fire. It was just a one-off blast. Immobilised the tank. We eventually got a QR quick reaction team out, gave us a hand and got back to camp. I was saying that, got checked for concussion, was totally fine, and I was back out the following day. Hardest thing for me at the time was not being able to speak about it with anyone. You know, you're fine, you're a man, get on with it. So eventually when I did phone home 2 days later, I spoke to my wife, and I remember saying nothing to her because you can't talk about these events. So the Army's way of trying to deal with a situation is just to get on with it and go from there. But I still love the forces and returned home shortly after that tour.
Now, if I can just go, backtrack a little bit there, Stephen. So that's an incredibly traumatic experience, particularly for civilians listening to that.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering about that mindset, Stephen, because you just said there that, you were in the tank, it's hit an ID, you've been blown up.
Yeah.
And then you've had very little time to process it. You've had no one really to talk to.
Yeah.
And the next day you're back out on patrol.
Yeah.
I mean, in that kind of 12 hours, was there anything you did individually to kind of just process that? Or was it just you were focused on the job?
I think two things there. One, it was a long time ago now. It's a bit of a blur. Okay. But secondly, talking to my mate Hopi, and I said, I was making sure you were okay. He goes, no, I was making sure you were okay. So we've all got this wee version that we thought we were checking each other over. But I was like, no, I checked you. He was like, no, I checked you. So we all got a wee version of that. And it shows you it just shows you how much your mindset can have one approach, but actually there's someone else's events have been slightly different to them in the same event. It was quite opening. And even though there was not a lot of support at the time, I've definitely spent the next 12, 13, 14 years speaking about this and try to piece together and build up that and put it behind me a bit.
I think as well, just it speaks very highly of the sort of the camaraderie in the armed forces that, your first reaction wasn't yourself.
Yeah.
It was your oppos next to you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's that whole selfless commitment. You're taught to. I think you're also taught that you probably can't feel the injury that happened to you because you've got adrenaline going through. So you always rely on your colleague doing that buddy checking of it, because they'll then spot that if there's something happening or if there's blood more than you feeling at the time because you're so absorbed in that incident.
No, that's it. I totally appreciate what you're saying there. That it was several years ago, but thanks for sharing that, Stephen. Really appreciate that. So if we can take it a step further now. So you've had 2 tours of Iraq.
Yeah.
And then you were telling me earlier that you then volunteered to take a tour of Afghanistan with the Black Watch.
Stupidly. You're taught always never volunteer for anything. So I came back young, loving the forces, and the Black Watch, which is another infantry battalion in Scotland, they're basically short 30 guys for doing their first tour of Afghan. I think it was Herrick 7, so quite early on in that transition. And I came to Jim Hall, fully 400 guys, who wants to do this, and just put your hand up, and then 30 guys got selected. We actually got inundated. I think 40 people got selected.
Okay.
Or volunteers, sorry. So that was that. So I just came back. My wife wasn't happy, but it's as long as I think you find a balance. When I'm home, very much invested in family, but I love my job too. So I was not either comes first. It's trying to work it all. Even though I said my wife wasn't happy, it was something that she knew I wanted to do and be part of. So then I joined the Black Watch, but because there's 30 of us, we were able to stay with our own unit unless we went and done training exercises. Okay. So saying after about 4 months of doing training in-house, we teamed up with the Black Watch in Kenya for our first climatised training. So getting used to the heat, we're going out on the ground. And as I said, we're patrolling through the night, kind of 3-4 weeks in, patrolling through the night, and basically a bush gets stuck to my colleague's jumper and it pings back right in my face. They're called bastard bushes because the thorns are like 6 inches
Oh, right, okay.
big, yeah. So everything in that country wants to hurt you, like animals, the terrain, everything wants to hurt you. I was unfortunate to get one of these freak accidents. So I was hit in the face. I kept on going all through the night, and I was still doing my job as a leader and posting people on stag duties and things. And in the morning, as I couldn't see anything with my right eye, I still had my right eye, there was no blood, no guts. I think the thorn went right through and out.
Oh, right, okay.
So it didn't look like there was anything wrong with me, but I couldn't see. So I was saying that the local field medic and the local field doctor, we're not touching this. We're not got the skill set or the equipment to look at this. And I got CASEVAC, which is an emergency evacuation off the ground. A couple of helicopters across Kenya, and I went to Nairobi, Aga Khan University Hospital, and within a couple of hours I was operated on there, and I was told they removed parts of the thorn and the debris around the eye. I remember that I came out of the operation and I asked one of the nurses if I could borrow the phone to phone my wife when I was out my face sort of thing. And I phoned my wife and I was like, Catherine, I said, what is it? I said, I'm dying. And this nurse comes on and she goes, I assure you, my love, your husband is not dying. He's fit and well. But that was me. So even before my unit at the time to even let her know there was an accident, I phoned her to say, I'm dying, which didn't go down too well.
No, can't imagine it did.
It didn't go down too well at all. So from Nairobi, I was there for maybe a day and I flew first class back to London. Had an army doctor with me, and every 15 minutes on the flight, this doctor thankfully gave me eye drops, made sure I was totally fine. Went to an eye hospital called Moorfields in London, and I remember we were going through the train stations thinking of our training kit, like our Kenyan kit I'd wore for 2 days. And I think he went into Primark and bought me the worst set of joggers and white t-shirts ever, but he got clean clothes. But this doctor would have been awake for like 2 or 3 days giving me eye drops when I was in and out, and just really tried, just amazing that camaraderie again. You know, he was that selfless commitment, took me back. And eventually after 2 or 3 days, I ended up in Birmingham and I spent a week there, and that's when my wife eventually came down and met me, and then that kind of started my recovery as such.
And I think it's very clear, I think, through, you know, working in the veteran sector myself, that when I've spoken to many veterans, the decision to leave the armed forces is something they've made.
Yeah.
For you, it was something very different.
Yeah, it was a force change. So in the forces, their weapons are predominantly right-sighted because the rounds eject out to the right. And because I'd lost my right eye, I couldn't do my job. And a lot of people say, why don't you become an admin or a doctor or a medic or whatever else you do in the forces? But first and foremost, your job is to soldier. So even though you might be a mechanic or a personal trainer in the forces, your job is to soldier. So because I couldn't do the soldier and pass the initial tests of your annual weapons test and your range test, I couldn't soldier. So it was taken from me. Unfortunately, I had about 13 operations on my eye. I had tropical infections, cataracts. Doctors openly say we don't know what's happening here. I was on lots of medication, and they said, look, we can take your eye out and hopefully that will stop the medication and give you some closure, or we can get on with it and keep doing what we're doing. I said, right, take my eye out. And they described it as, so I saw my eye, but no vision, and they described it as an egg. We cut the top of my eye out, scoop out the inside, and then seal it back up, so they didn't need to take the whole ball out and things. So I was like, that's fine. Unfortunately, and the timing wasn't the best, but a week after my operation to take my eye out, I had a medical board in the army tell me that you're no longer fit for service, son, and you'll be out in about 6 months' time, roughly. And just wait for more information. And that was really it.
And I think, you know, we've just been talking about your experiences in the armed forces, and I think your passion for the forces and soldiering is compelling. So, I mean, how did that feel for the medical board just to basically impart that news?
I was ready.
You're ready.
2 years of not doing your job, and because I had, like, this was a time as well when people were coming back from Iraq and Afghan, lost limbs and bereavements, And I thought, I've only got an eye issue. Like, this is nothing compared to losing a leg. It's funny because I've spoken to quite a few amputees since, and they're like, how do you manage losing an eye? I'm like, how do you manage losing a leg?
Exactly, yeah.
Human body's so adaptable. You don't quite understand your own injury because you learn to manage it. Do you know what I mean? Or in some cases you don't, but predominantly you learn to manage your injuries. It doesn't become a thing. But 2 years I've been in a tracksuit and operations. I wanted to join the army to do army soldiering. I wasn't doing it, so I was happy to leave.
Yeah, so in many ways you were kind of ready for the change.
Yeah. I would say so. I mean, if I could go back in time, I would definitely say take a bit longer, make use of additional training, recruitment. Like get myself, because if I decided to stay in the forces and be sick at home but do training, it would make me better equipped for Civvy Street.
So Stephen, you talked about feeling ready for making the change from military to civilian life. So if I could turn your attention now to your memories of your first day as a civilian, can you share a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that I had an operation to remove my eye in the May, and the med board the following week later. I didn't have much communication from the forces thereafter. My unit the Royal Scots were now doing their pre-train deployment, and I was kind of just left to kind of mosey on. So I remember it was December the 4th, 2011. I was in the forces. And December the 5th, 2011, I was out the forces, no longer a serviceman. Mixed emotions, very mixed emotions. Ready for it in terms of wasn't doing my job. Prepared for it, not really. Okay. Not really at all.
And was there a real sort of sense of, did you feel a real acute sense of change in terms of belonging?
I felt a sense of, I need to get my finger out and do something again. So I remember actually I was feeling sorry for myself. Mentally, emotionally, all these things going through my head. And I was only 25, 26, so quite a young man, having had this forced change of leaving the forces. So let's do something. So I stupidly signed up to do the Edinburgh Marathon, not the following year, that year. So I left, obviously, it was December/January. And the Edinburgh Marathon was in the May. And you think, you're in the forces, you're quite fit. But 2 years I've been sick at home, mentally, emotionally not prepared for it, not doing your normal. So as much as I was fit in a previous life when I was younger, I didn't feel fit then. So it definitely was a challenge for me. So every kind of other day I started running. I wasn't doing the best training programme because I had to get out of the house, I think, and because of all this free time, I was just running for like 13 miles twice a week.
Oh, wow,
and
okay.
that's not a way I would train now. Yep. I would do a bit of fartlek, a bit of 5Ks, time training. So I didn't feel I trained properly for it, but I was training, had a young family at the time, and you have to kind of show them that you have to get on with it. So no time to kind of feel sorry for myself. At the same time, my wife went and joined the police, so I became the house husband, for lack of a better word. My wife became the kind of breadwinner as such. It was mixed emotions. I can imagine. I was doing this very high impact job. Then I'm sick at home doing the school runs, but my wife is now doing training for the police. And I remember one time, and it took me years later to realise that I was feeling quite resentful ironing her police uniform. Not against her, I just felt quite resentful that I wasn't doing it, so it was difficult. So
it's very, very much sounds like, to me, it's like there was real challenges in terms of a new sense of identity. Would you say that's quite fair? Because it seems the parallels are quite scary. You're talking about the fact that you've gone from a uniform service, you've come out, and then now your wife is now in uniform service.
Totally. And my wife always worked as well before it, so we were a working young family. But having been in that environment, doing your job, and it's not... In the force, it's not a normal job, and it's quite extreme when it's relaxed, when it's very relaxed, but it's not a mundane Monday to Friday. It does have the highs and lows. So I was just having more lows of doing the normal kind of the day-to-day life.
And I found it really interesting. You talked about running there, and fitness is a core element of life in the armed forces, and you've chosen to go back to that one thing you're in control of. you've gone back to that fitness.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's set the foundation for everything else that followed. Is that a fair statement?
Definitely a fair statement. I've since realised that actually fitness is what gets me grounded. It's, people talk about meditation being in some sort of yoga studio or up a hill. Meditation is doing something that you enjoy that can give you a distraction from life, from my perspective. So when I was running, I was controlling my breathing, getting that endorphins going. But oh my God, it was hard. It's hard working like 9 to 5 and doing fitness in your own time.
Yeah.
I love being paid to be fit, but see, you try to do it in your own time, it's difficult. Try to keep that motivation up.
I think as well, particularly too, when you're in the forces, you kind of get up, you have your breakfast, there's a wee bit of time along around, then you do your PT, and then you get on with the rest of your day. Whereas that, again, you're in control of when you do your fitness. So again, it's a learning curve in many ways.
Totally. And I went through peaks and troughs when I haven't done my fitness, and I do feel probably worse for it mentally. So fitness is a big thing, and I take my hat off to so if I'm in a really low place, I seem to don't do fitness, and it's the worst thing for me to do is to stop doing it. So I really take my hat off to people that are in a difficult position but still can go to the gym and still can do the fitness, because that keeps them on steady footing.
Absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that, Stephen. Really appreciate that. So if we can now turn to getting started in civilian life. So something we were talking about off camera was the Forces pension and the specific tariffs that I think many sort of servicemen and women who will leave the forces might find this really useful to learn through your experience.
So I fell under a scheme called the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme. That came into place in 2005 and replaced the War Pension Scheme. So in the scheme, there's 15 tariffs, 15 being a scratch, and number 1, loss of 2 legs and sight and hearing, really quite severe tariffs. The first couple lower ones, you don't get any monthly support. You just get initial payments. So if you broke your leg in the forces, they might give you some compensation for breaking your leg, but you can get on with it. The more severe, so I fell right in the middle, tariff 8. So I was awarded some compensation, which I got quite early on. And then I was told I'd be given a thing called a GIP. It's a guaranteed income payment.
Okay.
It's basically a monthly payment from the forces as a military pension. Right, that's what they call it. But I was saying off camera, so because I had my compensation, I was able to buy a house. So I was quite fortunate. And my wife always worked, so we had that security. But I had no clue what I was getting until after I left the forces. So once I was formally discharged from the forces, about a month later, I then received my paperwork to say, this is your monthly pension, this is where you're going to get. So it was a very uncertain time, and you can imagine the stress having 3 young sons, trying to juggle not only a house move and a force change. So not only did I lose my eye, I lost my job, I lost my house. So not just the identity, it was a lot of the kind of physical security you need, your foundations. So it was difficult, but thankfully it all kicked in. It's been quite smooth since.
And I think another key element in the veteran strategy, but equally too, when I've had chats with many veterans too, is the topic of education, employment and training. Yep. So what was your experience with regards to finding like a pathway to a potential new career path?
At the time I was not ready, and I openly chose to sign away my resettlement. But thankfully, I could defer it for 2 years. So thankfully, I just penciled it just there and then. I penciled my resettlement. I wasn't ready. I had to almost just get out of the forces, get away from it for a while. Because to do your resettlement, it's usually having to go back into a barracks to sign paperwork, or constant reminder of you're a civvy, but you're still in this world. And I couldn't get the clear cut off that I needed. So I took a couple of years, and within that couple of years, I ran a marathon. Fantastic. My sons moved to a new area, and because I'm a glutton for punishment and I always volunteer for things, I volunteered to do like the kids football coaching.
Yep.
But that was fantastic. Doing the badges, and just it's easiest to find a job when you're in a job or when you're doing voluntary work. So absolutely. You need to stay active. And I had all this free time, and I was too young to be a pensioner. Do you know what I mean? I was too young. And unfortunately, when I'm doing the school run, it's predominantly mums that
that's right.
are doing it. So there wasn't really clubs and things for me to do. And because I spent 10 years in the forces, I'd lost a lot of civilian friends. And because my military friends were trained to go away and do their job, I was a bit isolated, I kind of felt, if that makes sense. Just didn't have a wee group that I could go and sit and have a cup of tea and
Sort of share lived experience.
yeah, totally.
In many ways.
And I suppose I probably wasn't as chatty back then as I am now. I've kind of grew up a bit, and I've kind of came through difficult periods as well.
And so you just talked about the topic there of sort of isolation and loneliness, which is something, through my experiences, many veterans will experience sooner or later in life. So were you aware of the support available to you at the time?
Not at all, and I was probably a bit scunnered from it all, given that my unit wanted to keep me, and then I spent 7 months with not a home visit. And I do know since then, from speaking to the personal recovery unit and things, there's now checks and balances in place. If you're sick at home after 2 weeks, you'll get a visit from someone, and these have all been kind of put in place. But I'm going back 15 years ago, when, from my perspective, soldiering was more about soldiering than taking care of the soldier, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but as the world changes, society changes, there's more support there, definitely.
So, Stephen, I'd like to now talk about making the change from military to civilian life with your family. And I think a huge part of making that change with your family is about managing relationships. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience of managing relationships and you making that change?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best example to be chatting about this. So a few years after leaving the forces, myself and my wife separated. I think the biggest thing is there was so much change going on that we couldn't control. And I think both my wife and myself, we're probably living our lives for our children. We'll try and make sure they were as stable and secure, and then you kind of forget about your own needs and wants. So a couple of years after leaving the forces, I did some voluntary work initially for a veterans charity in Dalkeith. I then got a job as an employment advisor, then got a job as the centre manager. Now, in a small advocacy drop-in centre with ex-forces coming in daily, either lost a job, mental health issues, breakup issues. I wasn't equipped to deal with that kind of overload of emotions. So when I came home, if my wife wasn't on shift, I'd be doing the football run, and then we just became like ships in the night. We just did not have time for each other, but the kids were happy, and that was our focus. I'd be like I saying, in the forces, you always care about your buddy. For me, it moved on to my focus, and I lost who I was. It became about my children. So they were happy, and it seemed like the more I was probably struggling, the busier I became. So in my own time, I became then, to help the charity save some money, I became a first aid instructor, and I used my forces LCAST, which is your learning credits, you take some support to retrain.
Okay.
So I used that, and like I said, so I think myself and my wife, we also had 3 close family bereavements. My wife lost her dad, and we had an adopted granny around the corner. And I remember my wife doing CPR, and it became about everyone else and not ourselves. So we broke up, and any breakup's horrible. Again, it's that forced change, and it's just difficult. And then when children are involved, it's equally hard. But we've tried to kind of shield them as much as we can from it all.
And would you feel, in many ways, it just sounds to me like you were talking about the fact your wife was now in the police force, and now your focus was now working in the veteran sector, supporting fellow veterans, and you just feel in many ways you just kind of lost that channel of communication. Is that fair to say? Totally.
Yeah, I mean, we both just change as people.
Okay.
And in the police force, again, it becomes like, it is a force, so you need to become accustomed to that way of processing and dealing with things. I was going through the difficulty of losing my own identity as, again, I go back to not being a breadwinner. I'm not some sort of chauvinistic person from the 60s. I just like to provide for my family and be that person. And like I said to you, I later realised in counselling that I was resentful. Iron Wife's police uniform, and that was eating away at me. And then because we were both caught up in it and so busy, we didn't speak about it.
Yep.
And it just became, so you're going out again. You're going to work again. And whose work's more important? And we're trying to juggle 5 children, and
just leads to conflict.
Totally, and that's all it was. It led to basically non-conflict conflict. There wasn't that. It was just that we just did not work as a team.
I say thanks for sharing, Stephen. Really appreciate that. And if we can now talk a little bit about mental health and well-being, which I think is a good link into this. Making this change to military civilian life, as you've already been telling me, can present many unique challenges to mental health and well-being. So is there anything you're happy sharing with us about that?
Yeah, so I had my first bout of mental health, it would have been the middle of 2019. So I left the forces 8 years before that. And I was a young, cynical soldier, didn't believe in mental health until I experienced it. So since then, I'm a big believer in talking. I'm a big believer on reflection, but also improving and changing who I am every day. I just recently organised a mental health awareness week at my work when different charities came in each day to talk about mental health and a big support of it.
And I think, like you've just been saying there, being able to channel your lived experience into supporting fellow veterans, that must make a huge difference to your mental health and well-being too.
I do get so much from it, and I never see myself being a support worker. Like I said, I was wanting to be the best, but I had said at the start I was all about being the best as a team. So now I'm trying to do what I do and still be part of that team. But I like being able to go home and have my own hobbies outside of the veteran sector. And I was saying to you off camera, I got a little souvenir gift a couple of weeks ago from my old unit.
Yes.
And I worked out that I left the forces 11, 12 years ago. And I was in the forces for 9-10 years. So I've been out of the forces longer now than my service. And I've had my ups and downs, and I'm learning every day. And for me, it's not a 2-year transition or a 6-month transition. It's a daily transition, wanting to change and wanting to learn and grow.
And I think I was just going to sort of close that topic by just asking you there, what would be your advice to any veterans experiencing mental health and wellbeing challenges? And I think for me, you've talked about so many different grounding techniques. Would you say that we would recommend that to fellow veterans?
I would say find a hobby. Simple as that. And I think if you find something you enjoy, but not by yourself, I think, even, I don't know, go and do a club or a hobby. But I think you need to put yourself first and not just do what you think you have to do, or don't just work and don't think, the stigma of mental health in the past 10 years significantly changed, and it's way more open now to talk and get support. So use it.
Absolutely. No, really appreciate you sharing that, Stephen. Thank you. And so, Stephen, I'd just like to look at what you're doing now in civilian life. So I think throughout the conversation we've had, it's clear that in both your professional and voluntary life, it's focused very much on supporting fellow veterans. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say. I think I also don't like it, because I like variety and I like challenge myself, and I almost feel like I'm staying in a field that's comfortable and familiar, but that's when you become not an expert, but you get to know the field. So it's funny because I feel like I should challenge myself and do something different. Mm-hmm. But then when you watch, say, football, for instance, and pundits on TV, they're usually ex-players. So why not stick to what you know and
fair point.
And do that? And I can be a bit more relatable and hopefully come across, and especially a job that I'm doing in support. So I think I mentioned earlier that I volunteered for a forces charity. I then fell into that job and loved it, but working for a small charity with lots of pressures and strains, as you'll know, it became too much. And because I wasn't quite equipped professionally to deal with being told every day that this person was struggling, haven't got a house, haven't got this, and because I wasn't doing the actual work, I was signposting to other agencies, you kind of feel a bit lost that you don't get that hard outcome. And there's one time, I think Christmas 2017, I'm getting a phone call at home saying, "Where's my taxi to my food bank?" And I'm like, I'm trying to be on holiday now with my family, so sure. Really difficult. So yeah. I left that small charity. I took 6-7 months off. Again, thankfully, having my pension, it's allowed me to think about what I want in life. And then a job came up for a charity called Sight Scotland Veterans. It's a visually impaired charity for anyone that's served in the forces. And as much as I do feel it's a bit easier for me to work there, because I'm a visually impaired veteran, I've also got lived experience.
Absolutely.
And thankfully within the charity, they've got people from the health sector, so it's not all veterans. It's a nice, holistic, rounded support. So I've got the banter of being around these 50, 60, 70-year-old veterans, hearing their stories and sharing my stories, and it seems to work quite nicely.
Yeah, and having worked at Sight Scotland Veterans myself, I know it's a very special place too. And I think just to go to the Limburn Centre in Wilkinston, around the forest and the day centre, and all these wonderful things happen, it must make a huge difference just from a perspective of job satisfaction, particularly mental health and well-being. You always feel like you're making a difference.
100%. I think I just said off camera that there's a gentleman there, 101-year-old, and he's teaching me or telling me that he would like to do CE Tai Chi. So he's giving me the movements. He's telling me what to play on my iPhone. Last week, for my hours activity, I was running bowls. So I was in the bowling green that's on this beautiful site in Sight Scotland Veterans, and I'm playing bowls with these visually impaired veterans, and they're using a string or using a marker, and they're brilliant. It's really shown me that I'm only 40-year-old, and then I met a veteran last week, his first day, and he goes, I'm 89 years young. And I'm just like, amazing. And I was saying that the ones that seem to be most with it physically, mentally, are the ones that keep going. So when you feel low, it's easy just to do nothing. I'm probably quite bad for it myself. Mm-hmm. But if you manage to keep, putting your foot over that door, socialising, talking, you'll keep going for a long time.
Absolutely. That's great stuff. And just finally, Stephen, so we're just reflecting on this incredible story you've shared today. I'm just wondering, looking back on everything you've said, what advice would you have given to your former self on that first day you left the armed forces? But equally too, what advice would you give to servicemen and women who are just about to leave the armed forces?
So I think if I had the chance to speak to myself, it'd be just take some time. And it sounds bad, but it's not just take the money, have that security. But when you leave the forces, you lose your security net. You then become part of the veterans world, and some of it is fantastic at different parts of the country, but in general, most charities aren't well funded. So just take that time. And if you can utilise the forces, they've got lots of pathways for open university, for training. A lot of people say that forces isn't great because it's that extreme. If it's really good, it's really good. If it's really bad, it's horrible. But if you can just take a bit of time, I think if I took a bit of time or did my resettlement, that I wouldn't be now having to learn a civilian qualification 15 years after leaving the forces. So I'm doing an SVQ3 in social care. If I had done that in my time in forces, I could be perhaps further down if I want to be in the management role of what I'm doing.
Fair point.
So I think we should take a bit more time and have a plan A, B, C, because it doesn't always work.
Yeah, contingency planning is crucial.
Definitely. And we say in the forces, all plans are great until first contact, and that's very true. But when you leave the forces, you do lose a lot of support.
Absolutely. And so if we just look at the servicemen and women now who are thinking about leaving the armed forces or have just left the armed forces, what advice would you give to them? Would it be something quite similar?
Definitely very similar. I would also say be open and engaging. A lot of people, especially myself at the time, I didn't want anything to do with the forces because it is a love-hate relationship. But if you can keep on chipping away at your own development, and I think acceptance is a big thing. You have to accept change. Change happens at all parts in life, but just take some time, be open, engaging, and keep talking to people.
Yeah, and I think that analogy that all plans don't survive first contact is just a fantastic way to end, isn't it?
And I often say as well, stay low, move fast.
Absolutely.
That's it.
That's great advice to close. So just in finishing, I really want to thank you for sharing your lived experience today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.